All right.
So take it away.
All right, thank you. All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming out. I appreciate your being here and your interest in this presentation I have to give. Just like to take a moment to direct your attention to this photo right here. This is an image, some may have seen it, of the display, which is currently out on display in Bewley Library. It's on gaming through the 90s. There's a lot of cool systems and games out there with a lot of information to accompany it. And if you got time tonight, if you haven't seen it, step out, take a couple of minutes after the presentation, and take a look at it. Real fun. Oh. So this is me. My name's Jason. I'm a student here at Southern, a junior undergraduate in the Information Management and Services program, which is fancy for library science. It's a unique program because it's undergraduate and that doesn't often get found in undergrad. So I'm happy to have it here. I am originally a student from Cornell University. I was studying urban planning there, so that's quite a departure. Wasn't what I was into. I took a gap year and I spent a freshman year there, then took a gap year, and when I discovered library science, I decided to enroll in this program here and came there the next fall after. I work part-time at Stop and Shop, grocery and dairy department. I have a good time there. I like what I do. I enjoy it very much, and of course I also collect video games. That right there is a picture of a substantial portion of my collection. Very proud of it, and I started collecting maybe about a year ago, and it coincides with my decision to pursue library science because I hope one day to have these games in a library publicly accessible. This is the guide for today's presentation. It's going to be 3 main points. Questions are going to be, I know I saw your hand up. We're going to try to keep questions to at the end of each section, and I'll let you know when the end of each section is. Also, I'll probably ask for questions halfway through the second one because that's a bit of a meatier topic. Yep, expected to be about 40 minutes for the presentation. If I go any longer, there's clocks all around this place, so I should be able to know. But I was hoping we stay on the time limit here. So firstly, I'd like to talk about the general brief history of recorded media and basically when it first came about. What we have here, writing was invented about 5,000 years ago. Recorded music, about 4,000. And we keep going and we get to photography and motion pictures in the 19th century, and it's not until really the mid-20th century, in the late 1950s, that video games even come about. And not until the early 70s when they're made available to people in their own homes. So from the 70s to now, that's about 50 years worth of video games, which in the grand scheme of history isn't really a lot. Video games are a really young form of media, and because of that, we're in a unique situation here where we have an opportunity to preserve video games in its entirety. Not just part of it, not just the parts that we have accessible to us, because it's all accessible to us. We can, from beginning to end, keep this preserved. And that's different from any of the other medias that we have. People will tell you that half of the motion pictures created before 1950 are completely lost from history. We cannot access them anymore. They're gone. That's not the case with video games. And not even forget about all the writing that's been lost since writing's inception. So it's a really unique opportunity that we have here. So why are games worth preserving, besides that? Most people think that games are just children's toys, or at a point they did. Some people think that games are something that they update every 5 years. They get a new system, they toss out the old stuff in with the new, and so on and so forth, as a cycle like that. And, well, that simply isn't true. Games are a lot more than that, for a lot of various reasons, and reasons that they're important to us. The first is that they carry a lot of historical value with them. Firstly, games can tell us a lot about technology as it was when the game was created. Right here I have a timeline of the Madden NFL series, a rough timeline, some assorted games. Oldest here and relatively newest over there. And we can see all the way from the first Madden game on my MS-DOS all the way to our modern systems. The way that technology and the things that we've created with technology have progressed. And it is through keeping the old games and comparing them with the new games and being able to look at and experience them that we're able to see this technological progression. They also carry a lot of cultural context with them. Namely, what was popular at a time that a game was created, what people were doing, what they liked, basically what society was all about. And these are all games here from 2003, and we can tell just by looking at and experiencing these games that 2003 was about house music, SpongeBob, extreme sports, and Call of Duty, which that was actually the year that the very first Call of Duty released, which of course is a big anticipated game franchise today. And so these games can also teach us a lot about the time outside of the technological aspect of which they were created. Games in a more discrete sense are also important for people studying game design. We actually have a game design, we at Southern do not. Right next door at Connecticut University, they have a game design program. And all the students there benefit from each and every game that they interact with, whether they're old, new, good, or bad. Good game can teach good game mechanics, sound design, storytelling, graphical design, and it can teach us what we might want to do, while a bad game can potentially teach us what doesn't feel good, maybe what doesn't sound good, or what people don't like to have in their games. You play one and you say, oh, I didn't like that. That was a bit weird. They're all teaching experiences, every single game. And so that in itself is a reason to preserve them all. And lastly, games have really transcended from its inception as a form of mere entertainment or a toy into an art form. They go through massive culture or creative processes, and there are many different aspects of them which we can draw parallels between them and other pieces of art. And here we'll look at some. Video games are a platform of expression for both the people who create them and the people who play them. The video games have directors and teams that work on them, just like books have authors and movies also have directors and teams. And we can see here we have famous video game directors and creators. We have many people that are behind the games that we make. They are passionate about what they do, and they express that through their work. And we even have games that can allow people to express themselves and what they have to create and share. Secondly, games are interactive in nature. Video games are unique compared to other forms of media in the sense that we interact with the game and the game interacts back. When you read a book, the book does not read you back. You are just interpreting the words that are in the page. when we watch a movie, the movie is also not watching you back. We are simply interpreting what's happening on the screen. But when we play a game, we input on our controllers into the game, and suddenly the game responds to what we've done and brings it back to us. And then we react to what the game has said to us and input to them, and it's this constant back and forth between technology that is unlike anything that we've ever created before. And it puts games in a highly unique and interesting place in the pieces of media that we have. And thirdly, games create reactions within the people that play them. And it's intended by the creators. The creators are trying to get reactions from the people that play their games, and the games, for example, their story could make you happy, sad, it could make you stressed or relieved or calm or excited, and not just a story, but also the gameplay of a game itself can do these things. We get frustrated when a game is hard, or excited when we're about to beat a level and we feel pride when we've gotten through that whatever it took us an hour or however long things take us when they get difficult. And games elicit reactions from their players. And what else is art besides an attempt by a creator to get people to react to what they've made? And that's part one. If there are any questions so far, then please feel free to ask them. If not, we'll keep rolling. So there are a lot of obstacles, difficulties in preserving games that some of us might be aware of, some of us might be less aware of. This is a fun picture. This is from when the rumored Atari landfill that was supposedly a myth until about 10 years ago when they actually excavated it all. And there were some games that actually worked in this landfill that they recovered from it. And that's a fun little story. Yeah, that's a 2013, 2014, I believe. Firstly, games are very expensive, usually anyways. And we all know this. I would think that we're all gamers in here, and our wallets know it as well. Games are not only expensive now, but they keep getting more expensive. Prices, especially in the past 5 years, for games, typically older games off the market, have continued to rise, often to double or triple what they used to be maybe 10 years prior. A lot of this is due to the ever lucrative collector's market. It's getting much more intense, much more vicious, and the prices reflect that. And secondly is because of resellers. And resellers see that collector's market, and they kind of blow it up to, they turn it to 11 with the prices. They are in control of the secondhand market for the most part, and they raise prices because they can, which isn't helpful to people like us who are trying to keep these things accessible as the art forms that they are. And you can see here all different types of systems. We got an Atari, NES, PlayStation, and even the games are getting much more expensive as time goes on. Here's a fun game here, Futurama on Xbox.
Very specific.
For $300. Well,
That's a Switch.
it is. You can either buy a Nintendo Switch or you can buy Futurama on the Xbox. Which, for some reason, both versions of this game are expensive. I don't know if it's ever gotten re-released, I would assume not. But there's a PS2 and an Xbox version, and they're both super expensive, which is weird. But that's one game. I'm gonna take a drink here. All right. game I'd like to talk about in particular is one called Panzer Dragoon Saga on the Sega Saturn. You might not have heard of this one, and it's because hardly anybody's ever played it. This is an interesting game. It was released for the Saturn in 1998, when the system was deemed by everybody, including its manufacturer, to be a commercial failure. It was discontinued. Only 7 games were released in America for the system in that year, this being one of them. Extremely low print. And to boot, this game runs on 4 discs. It is considered to be, by those who have played it, to be one of the greatest RPGs that they have ever played. It's never been re-released. No, this is the only way to play it. It's to pay $1,000 or more, less if you're lucky, but it's the secondhand market, who knows, and get a copy that hopefully works. A game that is considered to be one of the best of its genre and one of the best created in its time. Completely inaccessible. And this is of course a very extreme example, which is important to share, but I wanted to show games to a less extreme case can also be expensive even if they're super common. Common as dirt, in fact. Wii Sports, best-selling game on a single console. That many units sold. 4th best-selling game of all time overall. And it costs $20 on the aftermarket, which in itself isn't a lot in the grand scheme of gaming. But when you consider that this is the single most sold piece of software for a single system, ever, or piece of gaming software, that is. We're asking $20 for that? Really? A game this common? How does that happen? Well, I've explained how it happens. Collectors markets and resellers. But it's not just for the super rare games. Wii Sports costs $20 on the aftermarket. And I feel I should mention these prices that I'm getting come from a website called pricecharting.com, which has become popular in the past 10 years. It is also a contributor to why prices are rising, because everybody has a common reference for what to price their games at. The way that website works is it takes the average sold listings for a game from Amazon, eBay, and its own website, and it creates that in statistics there. So those are all the prices you've been seeing. So that's expenses. Next we're going to talk about aging hardware and how that can start to limit what we have to work with in terms of the materials that we can actually preserve. Just soak that in. It's true. And he's not the only one who's done this. People take out their old systems. People who aren't the biggest of gamers, they take out their old systems that they have lying in their basement or their attic or whatever, and they look at it and they say, I don't want this. And sometimes they don't know the value of it, so they just throw it out. I was at a tag sale. I like to go tag sailing during the spring and summer months, and there was a guy, he was holding a tag sale, and he said, oh, video games, I threw those out a couple of weeks ago. Why? You're holding a tag sale. And just people do this without, they just don't know. And we lose so much stuff that way. And of course nobody would talk about it because the people throwing it out are the people who don't really care much about it. And that's not the only way that we lose things en masse. Things also break. Now, this is a real dumpster, posted online by somebody, I presume this man right here. And all of these are possibly broken game consoles. I believe he said that he scavenged a couple of working rumble packs for the 64 and some nice looking shelves of the consoles, but mostly they're all broken. And technology, if it's not maintained over time, or sometimes just by poor chance, will deteriorate. And if we have a rough estimate of how many of something exists by its sales numbers, that estimate is probably significantly smaller between the things that have been thrown out and the things that are presumed to be broken that get thrown out. Things that are broken that oftentimes can actually be fixed if the people who have it would only know that there are people who can and are willing to fix them. There are a variety of reasons why a game system might be broken, some of which can't be fixed and some of which can. Some may be familiar with these. These are errors on consoles from the mid to late 2000s. Causes the whole console to break. Term is they're bricked because they're akin to a brick. They do nothing. They can be fixed, but it takes a really knowledgeable electronic technician and a lot of time. These are very complex things to fix, and most of the time those are going to end up just getting tossed away. And here on the right we have a Game Gear. I was talking with somebody before the presentation started about Game Gears. These things are quite troublesome. I have my own Game Gear story. I'm not going to talk much about it now, but I have one working Game Gear. It took me maybe 6 months of on and off tinkering and talking to some technological friends to fix it. Because Game Gears reliably stop working after about 20 to 25 years. Reliably. Because of the way they were made, the capacitors in a Game Gear actually just go bad. They stop working. And when that happens, the sound in the screen goes out. And this happens in most models. So somebody who has their Game Gear in their attic or wherever, and they take it out and they say, oh, this thing's broken, they'll probably end up throwing it out. Who wants a system that doesn't do anything? But if there are capacitor replacement kits that cost like $10 online, and all it takes is somebody who is moderately skillful at soldering. Because it's an easy operation, it just takes a lot. There's like 15 capacitors on this thing, but we know how to fix it, and it's pretty cheap to fix it. But you have to know these things, and you have to be aware that there are ways to fix broken things that we have. So again, a lot of stuff potentially being lost just by being broken. The games themselves, not just the systems, also require maintenance in order to stay usable. Cartridges are the most common form of distributing older games, and they're actually quite easy to maintain. Usually all you have to do is keep the contacts clean and replace the batteries. Now the contacts, there's an old myth that goes around that you can clean the dust out of your cartridges by blowing into them. That's completely false. In fact, that's bad for your cartridges. Never, ever blow into your cartridges. And that is because our saliva is corrosive to the metal on the contacts, and it will break down the cartridges and while it will remove the dirt in the short term, it will do long-term damage to your cartridges. The way to actually handle cleaning dirt and corrosion on your cartridges is to take some isopropyl alcohol, rubbing alcohol, a Q-tip, just keep going over it until no more dirt comes off. It's a lot safer, it's a lot less corrosive. And batteries. Back in the mid-90s, when games were starting to become more complicated and you needed to save your data, game developers started putting these coin batteries inside of their cartridges so that they would save. I'm not sure exactly how that works on a technical end, but I do know that after about 20 years, the batteries will die and the game will stop saving. And this too can be fixed. It's a simple soldering job. You just have to unsolder and resolder in a new battery with these special solder joints you can see on it. Relatively accessible on the secondhand market. So not a big problem, but again, you have to be aware of that. There are a lot of games from that 90s, early 2000s era that they don't save. And they will stay that way unless somebody replaces the battery. The second major form of media that games are released on are discs. This right here is a diagram of a CD specifically. Blu-rays and DVDs work in a similar fashion, but I believe the layers that are displayed here are in different spots on the Blu-rays and DVDs. I'm not sure where exactly. There are two major problems that will show up here. One we are all very familiar with is scratches on the disc. It will interfere with the reading of the data on the disc by the laser. If the scratches are shallow, they can be wiped off with microfiber cloth and some water. But if they're deep enough, then they can't be gotten rid of, and it will permanently affect how the game is read, and it will render the disc useless, or at least make it slower or skip a lot. The second big problem is something called disc rot. And now these here are a couple of photos of games suffering from disc rot. Typically happens when the layer here, lacquer that's made to protect the disc from oxidation, deteriorates itself, which causes oxidation. And the disc is no longer protected. It will start breaking apart or getting moisture damage, stuff like that, also rendering the disc useless. Now the best way to prevent stuff like this is to keep your discs in the proper stored environment, climate control, cool environments that are low in moisture are best for discs. Well, that's disc care. That's how we can keep those safe. There are also cassettes and floppy disks. I don't know much about these, honestly. These are mostly relegated to 80s computer gaming, like Commodore 64 gaming. And I'm not all that familiar with that stuff. I know that these are also worthy of preservation, but I don't have much to offer on that. I just thought it would be important for everybody to know. Yes, this is halfway through this segment, so if there are any other questions,
How would storing a game on a cassette tape work?
I wondered that too, and I looked it up a couple weeks ago. I think it's because the data is stored as sound on the cassette, and then it's transcribed through the computer when it's played into images because of the pitches that the sounds are at.
That is so cool.
I don't know how they thought of that. It is weird. It is cool. It's really cool. You had a question as well?
I actually just wanted to mention, if anyone ever does clean their contacts with the alcohol, don't get it on the label. Made that mistake, it destroys the label. So you gotta be real careful.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure you do.
Some labels are real susceptible to that. There are some labels actually, I wouldn't advise that you start rubbing alcohol on your labels. There are some that are more resistant to that, and they have coatings. Like, there are some Atari cartridges I have here. The early ones that are officially made, they got like a matte finish on them. So you can, yeah. So I cleaned off some gunk that was on this. I think it was just last night, and yeah, the label's completely fine. Like, the finish protects it, but that's not reliable. So definitely need that warning. Don't get it near the label, just to be safe. Thank you. So now, sorry, I'm a bit mixed up. I did some restructuring and I forgot that this slide was here specifically. I'd like to talk about boxes and manuals for a second. Some people care about this, some people do. Collectors usually do. Like covers to books. Like, for a book, the cover protects it. It provides context of what's inside to the person using it. You wouldn't rip off the cover of a book and then leave the pages on a shelf in a library for people to use. It's a very important part. And likewise with boxes and manuals, they do the same thing. They protect the content, and they give an idea of the content itself to anybody picking it up. And manuals, especially, are useful for older games, like the ones you'll be playing after this presentation. Because they didn't have the space on the cartridges to explain how to play the games or any of the features on the games back then. So they put all the information in manuals, and it's actually quite critical to the experience that for some games that the manuals are there, which is ironic because older games manuals are the hardest to get. And there are 4 different styles that I have here of boxes and manuals that you would encounter. The first being plastic cases. This is most of what games come in today. Things like your Xbox and PlayStation games, Nintendo Switch games will come in. Excuse me. Funnily enough, in the late 80s, early 90s, Sega would release their own Master System and Genesis cartridges in these fancy VHS box-like game cases, which are relatively easy to come by compared to other packaging from the day because they were so high quality, people saved them. So I like to collect my Genesis and Master System games in the box like that. Secondly, cardboard boxes. This is what most cartridges, besides those special Genesis games, were released in back in the day, and most of them got thrown out. They were made to get thrown out. They were intended to get thrown out. They're super expensive to get. I don't advise anybody try collecting them. I only collect the very few Genesis games that came in cardboard boxes, but even that, I'm doing something wrong there. I wouldn't advise it. It's just not worth it, and the manuals can get bought by themselves in the aftermarket. Jewel cases, which most PC games come in a jewel case like this from the late 90s, early 2000s. Also PlayStation 1 and Dreamcast games. Very similar to plastic cases in terms of collecting, but the manual is more important here because it actually doubles as the front cover art, because it's a transparent frontage. And lastly, I'd like to talk a little bit about the long box, which is a weird specimen. Was well, back in the 90s, game sellers wanted more shelf space for their games. They wanted to convey to consumers that games had more to offer. So they made these larger style cases, in the style of a CD jewel case like that, but it was taller and deeper, and they were expensive to produce, and they were very, very fragile, and they most often break. And to boot, they were only ever used for Sega CD, Sega Saturn, and early PlayStation releases, which in themselves have different variations of how they're created. So these are, I just like to talk about them because I think they're cool. But these are also weird little contraptions that you might end up coming across. There are a couple, if you'd like to see one up close in the display out there. I think we got Myst in a little case for the Saturn. We got some PlayStation game, but I digress. For those cardboard box games that I told you to forget about, there are aftermarket solutions, which I think are really convenient and high quality. This is from CustomGameCases.com. They have high quality reproduction plastic cases for some of the game systems that you see here on the side, and then some. They have box art on the outside, which strives to replicate the actual cardboard box and what was on the outside of that. I think that, especially for a librarian who wants to build a collection, that these are really great resources to make your collection look very uniform and official. So I recommend those for anybody getting serious about collecting old cartridge games. Now, we get to where I thought I was at halfway. To me, the biggest and most pressing issue in game preservation that's upon us is digital content, which we all interact with. It's becoming very, very popular, which is exactly why it is dangerous. There are a multitude of reasons why that poses a problem. Firstly, there is no secondary market for your digitally purchased games. You buy a digital game firsthand from the seller, and once you have it, you can't resell it. When you're done with it and you don't want to play it anymore, you can't give it to somebody else. You cannot share it. You can't really do anything with it. You can't get that game further down the line from places like game stores or online sellers or even tag sales. The only way you can get it is on the digital shop that game was released for, which kind of bottlenecks the different options that somebody might have in trying to obtain that game. Pardon me. And that is a problem because game stores inevitably close down. The digital game stores, that is. There is precedent for this. Digital game stores run on servers, which are most often run by large corporations. And when those servers get expensive to maintain, and the return isn't there, and they're not getting used much, they will get shut down. Like I said, there's precedent. The Wii Shop channel shut down 4 years ago in 2019. The PlayStation Portable store shut down about 2 years ago. And just 3 days ago, quite timely for the presentation, the Nintendo 3DS and Wii U eShops closed down permanently, rendering it impossible to legally purchase the exclusive items that can be found on those shops. There is a lot of exclusive digital content that is produced only for these storefronts, and now that the storefront is closed, it is impossible to get them legally. Pushmo, Affordable Space Adventures on the 3DS and Wii U respectively are praised examples of those. Impossible to purchase. You cannot legally purchase them. I cannot stress that enough. They're gone. If you haven't bought it in the past, it's gone. The only way you could potentially get it is if you bought an entire system from somebody that they hadn't factory reset already, which is a ridiculous circumstance in the first place. And that's unique to Nintendo systems, since digital purchases are linked to your account on PlayStation and Xbox systems. We also find that games which are available at retail, but were also available on the online shop, are no longer available at retail price. Suddenly, this game here went from $40 to the aftermarket physical price of a low $190. And at that price, it will stay or rise. So that's game stores which are already dead and past. There are more stores which do exist. They are not guaranteed safety. Based on Nintendo's track record, the Nintendo Switch eShop will probably shut down. Your Xbox store, your PlayStation store, they are at risk of shutting down, and even the mighty Steam shop is at risk of being shut down someday, because Valve isn't an indestructible company. It is possible for Valve to go under someday, and when they do, their store will close. And all the games that are lost there, in fact, most of the entire PC gaming environment will be gone. I see a question back there.
Yeah, I've been waiting to ask this question because what you said about the Wii Shop channel, the Nintendo eShop, and the PSP store, the PlayStation store, the whichever one. I like to get the perspective. I like to pick your brain on this one. I really want to know what's your opinion about piracy in general, like in games in general. Like piracy?
Piracy?
Yeah, like in games in general, because like like for those Wii Shop, Nintendo Wii Shop, you could just mod your 3DS and you could get those games. You could get those games back, but you had to like go to the toy and everything. I was really more expecting. I really want like the person who collects games.
Yes.
Spectator.
I understand people's reasoning for engaging in piracy and emulation and stuff like that. I have a slide for that later. I will talk about it now because I feel it is relevant. I also believe in adherence to the law. Piracy is illegal. It is illegal copying of a game without the consent of the copyright holder. And for that reason, I do not condone that. It is not an ethical conduct, even if it is easy to do. And I think that as a gaming community, we have to uphold a certain standard to respect the law. And that includes not pirating games which might be inaccessible otherwise. Yes?
But what if that, like, there's a game that you really wanted to play, but it's too expensive right now in the game market?
This is, again, very understandable. I had some slides specifically about libraries and games in libraries that I omitted because this is more about preservation and not necessarily library science. But I believe that libraries and the ability to circulate things through libraries are the key to a lot of that, and that resource is being underutilized for games. There are special exemptions to copyright law that are granted to libraries, museums, and archives specifically. Exemptions related to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which goes under a triennial review period to get those exemptions updated. And it is through that libraries are actually currently, public libraries, museums or archives, under certain conditions, are allowed to make copies of games, so long as they do not leave the physical premises. There is currently documentation of organizations who are trying to further, revise that exemption so that the games can be circulated, which would provide a legal and ethical and affordable solution to that. And I think that that is a solution that we should all work towards, because again, I think we should all respect the law and what it represents. It is unfortunate that, and I think that also gaming companies should be doing a lot more to make their games available. They, as the copyright holders, have a responsibility to put these games, which were made for a commercial market, to be consistently available on that market, especially as they have cultural value. And that's really all I can say about it without repeating myself. It's a very unfortunate thing. I wish that, and that's why I do want to do what I do, is I want people to be able to access those rare games that they can't possibly be expected to affordably obtain. And I get it, I do. You had a question as well?
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say, what about when, like, as you said, or actually you said that, but in cases where Nintendo will remove a game from the eShop, like, let's say, Zelda 4 Swords Anniversary Edition, and it was sold digital only, and they removed it from the eShop, and now the eShop itself is gone in of itself. So there's literally no other way to possibly get that game.
Mm-hmm.
And so Nintendo isn't going to be losing money because they're refusing to release the game anyways.
Mm-hmm. That's just another unfortunate situation. Very similar. The problem there is that it was being the time span for getting the game was being cut even more short, which is also unfortunate. Everything I've said still applies. fun fact, I own Meme Run on the Wii U, which
Okay.
was available for a total of 4 months before it was removed for infringement of copyright for the troll face. If I were anybody else, I'd say that I wish I was lying to you, but I actually play that game every time I turn on my Wii U.
I'm so sorry.
So it's a fun, terrible, endless runner.
What's the fun part of that?
Yeah. What's the fun? I think we should move on. All right. So last and final thing about digital content is the end user license agreement. Most of you know this as the thing that is 1,000 pages long on your new digital devices that you skip through and then click accept. And I don't really know what's on the inside of that. On the inside is actually something looking a bit like this. This is from the Sony PlayStation Network End User License Agreement. And if you read that, it will basically tell you that you are not allowed to do anything at all with the things that you purchase. In fact, they have the right to take it away from you at any time for a reason that they find appropriate. And you cannot do anything with it besides play it by yourself. Anything else is a violation of their end user license agreement, which obviously for official preservation efforts is a big issue for digital games. Pardon me. These hold water because of something called the click wrap agreement, which is when you click that accept button at the bottom of your end user license agreements, that is a explicit and deliberate acceptance of the terms that are contained within. It is legally binding. If the company who put out this agreement ever wanted to seek a lawsuit against you for breaking something like that, they have legal grounds for that because you deliberately clicked agree on this agreement. Physical games aren't under the same crazy restrictions that digital games are with their licensing agreements, which is one of their great strengths. In the United States, we have this copyright law and something called the first sale doctrine, which is what essentially makes libraries allowed to distribute their materials. It is what makes secondhand markets allowed to exist. It says that any officially produced first copy of a game, such as some of the games that I have here that you'll be playing today, are able to be resold and shared, so long as it is not illegally copied or publicly displayed for an audience. And that's possible with physical games because of the click wrap agreements that digital games are subject to. That is not possible with digital games. And we are protected by the law for the circulation of official copies of old games. So that makes physical games of immense importance when considering preservative efforts. And I encourage everybody, if you have an option between physical and digital, always choose physical for the reasons that I've talked about here. Society is starting to move the other way. Gaming is in a very pivotal point as really the last major type of media that is distributed on physical copies. Music, movies, not quite literature either, but so many forms of media have moved to all digital, and we can see subscription services and everything are limiting access to all that kind of stuff in different ways. But video games are still holding on, and we as consumers have the power to influence whether the full leap to digital happens or not. And for preservation's sake, it is critical that it does not make that full leap and that we continue to have physical copies of the games that we make. Any questions? Again. All right, we'll take another drink and then we'll get into the final part of the presentation here.
Yes. The main reason why years and years ago, switch to mainly getting my games digitally was just because it was pretty inconvenient to have to, because I would always switch games pretty often, and I had a short attention span, so I'd have to start one game, get up, switch to a different game, when I could just do all that without having to leave and do all that on the system itself.
This is understandable, and that's part of the reason why they've become so popular. There are virtues, there are certain luxuries that come with purchasing digital games that you simply don't get with physical games, such as the lack of clutter, the ability to jump between them. But everything that has been talked about here, in spite of that, still stands. And, well, that's really the heart and soul of it.
I do have a 64 now.
Cool. Yeah, I love 64. That was the first retro console I ever bought, actually, 7th grade. Yeah.
Crazy. Well, you said you've been collecting games for over a year, right? So over the span of a year, what is that? I don't know how to say, but what is that? What is like one game that you have right now that considered like expensive or way considered?
An expensive game, well, like I said, I mostly get my stuff from tag sales. Sometimes I'll go to Game Exchange and peruse. I did that a lot more back when I was collecting my systems so that I could actually play the games and test them. Because sometimes they don't work. It was important to have the systems to test so that they do. Probably the most expensive single game that I've ever picked up was at a tag sale. I got a lot of like 25, 30 games for maybe $75, and one of them was Pokemon Black 2, complete. And that game's like 130-ish online complete, and I bought it for less than $1.
Wow.
So but
that's
that's not my proudest moment actually. My proudest tag sale moment is when I was snooping around. There was also some other guy, I could tell he was looking for games, but he didn't see what I saw. There was a PlayStation Vita that was sitting in a box all alone, and I talked to the mother who was running the tag sale. She said, "Oh, that doesn't work anymore. My son's at college. You can have that PlayStation for free." And I took it home. I said, "I bet you this thing still works." All that was wrong with it was the battery was dead. So this passed, and the PlayStation Vita is weird because it doesn't turn on unless you got like a 20% charge. So unless you knew that, you would think it doesn't work. So I asked for a replacement battery for Christmas, and then replaced it. Fidgeted with a difficult, bothersome ribbon cable, and it works completely fine. I got a PlayStation Vita completely free from a tag sale. So, yeah. The most that I ever spent on a single item at a tag sale or in the store was when I bought my Sega 32X, which is on display out there. I bought that for $140.
Wow.
Which, that thing has risen in price over the past 5 or 10 years. It used to be much cheaper, but considering the now of things, I think I don't actually have buyer's remorse for it, so I consider that a win. I went backwards. But yeah, I got tons of fun stories about tag sales and stuff like that. So let's talk about the way that games are being preserved today. Firstly, and we already talked about this, so I'm not going to harp on it. We have the emulation thing. You can run things on computers without actually having the original hardware, and it is illegal. And again, we've covered that, so I'll skip right by that, save some time. There are archives and databases online, mostly fan-run, which have a lot of great historical resources for video games. These are some of the ones that I use a lot when I'm collecting and keep track of my collections in my spreadsheets and stuff, and this is where I get my general information. I love SegaRetro.com, very high quality, even for a wiki-based site. And PC Gaming Wiki is interesting because it actually has ways that you can get old, incompatible, like old PC game discs to run on modern hardware. And it's got like step-by-step instructions for that. So I think that's a really convenient source. And of course, the glaring issue with all these, as nice as they are, as helpful as they are, especially if you want to learn more about gaming history, is that they are wiki sites. They are editable by anybody. Anybody who's been in the education system in the past 20 years know that people tell you, and they tell you Wikipedia is not in itself a trustworthy source, which is true. Of course, they have the reference list at the bottom. You've probably heard that 1,000 times too. But at the end of the day, these are just fan communities. They are not official, legitimate, endorsed services. While nice, it's not quite there yet. There is only one official preservation effort, government-recognized 501c3 nonprofit that I know of, and that is this, the Video Game History Foundation. They, well, you can see what they do here. They like to deal a lot with things that were not released on the retail market. Things like production copies of games, or beta versions, or advertising materials from games, things of that nature, things that were never really sold or meant to be available to the public. And that is, they deal a lot with the historical side of games, which in itself is also very noble. It's not the part of preservation that I'm interested in, which is getting the actual games that were released to be accessible to the general public. They've said in press releases that that is not their focus. They want to focus on things like the non-market stuff. So that is somebody out there. What they're doing is important. It's just not overlapping with what I'm all about. Library collections. As I've mentioned, I think that libraries are the one major avenue that we have to make video games accessible to the general public, especially those that are rare or hard to get. And I'll show you a couple of different groups and things that can be happening in libraries to make that more realizable. Here I have a story about the Gamer Group, which is a combined effort between the University of Washington, I believe their information science program, and the Seattle Interactive Media Museum, which is unfortunately defunct. It might have been a project by them, I'm not entirely sure. But between the years of 2012 and 2018, they did a lot of novel, interesting research on controlled vocabulay and authority control, which I won't go much into. They're library terms. Mostly, it references the unit. Okay, there we go. Controlled vocabulary references the uniformity of and widely accepted nature of the vocabulary and the organizational systems that it uses. Which is important in trying to develop a library for video games, because as we know, there's not really that much of an official way to talk about things. One example that I think is great about the importance of this is game genres. Is Zelda an RPG?
Zelda 2, I guess.
Zelda 2. Well, that's more RPG than anything.
Action RPG.
But is Zelda?
Yeah.
Some people would disagree. I think it's an action adventure.
Yeah, it's open world.
Yeah.
But an RPG would probably only the second game would really be that.
Depends on how you define it.
There it is.
RPG.
It has not been officially defined and widely accepted upon. This group, unfortunately, like I said, it went through 2012 and 2018. And they don't really work on stuff like that anymore. They still make things, but it's mostly about VR, which I think is unfortunate. They have a lot of really great quality work. They have been trying to come up with different hierarchies and taxonomies to describe games so that they can be very easily categorized and implemented into library collections. When I found out that this effort existed, I was ecstatic. They have a lot of great items. I was going to talk in detail about one specifically, which I cut out of the presentation. It's about the relationships between games that are different versions of the same game. Because games have remasters, they have re-releases, they have different versions with different features or DLC or all that kind of stuff, and it's this model that kind of connects all of it into one table that's very easy to look at, and I think it's important. That's my favorite work by them, but like I said, I had to cut it out for time. I want you guys to be able to play the game. I do still have the slides if anybody wants a deeper explanation of that, because I think it's interesting. Almost done here. Game, consoles, and accessory lending. One of the things that people say to me when I tell them about what I want to do and how I want to put games in libraries, they say, one, that's expensive. And then after I explain that, they go, two, nobody has any of the systems that you want to have in libraries. Nobody has these retro systems. How are anybody going to be able to actually use them? That is true, but it doesn't have to be true. Once upon a time, Blockbuster had rentable game systems back when they used to exist, right? So you could rent a game system that you didn't own. You could take it out and play any games that you had or rented from them as well in your home. You don't need to have the system. You can just play it. Yes?
How long do you wait system?
I am unsure how long at Blockbuster you could rent it out for. Of course, and I cannot answer that. I'm unsure. I'm sorry. And I think that libraries can do this too. Of course, since it's a library, it will not be rented but lended. There is precedent for lending hardware and somewhat expensive hardware as well in libraries, even around here. In my hometown of Wallingford, they have something called the Library of Things, run by their own makerspace. And they lend out all of these types of technology, synthesizers, GoPros, power banks. They've got tons of technologies, and why couldn't game consoles be a part of that? If people were provided a way to get affordable access to these consoles and to easily get it brought into their home, I'm sure that they would use it more often. Take a weekend and say, hey, I want to experience a couple of games. I'm sure they would. I know they would, which is why I believe in that idea. That solves that issue. That's how we allow people to have these games in their homes so that they can enjoy the games in a library collection. If you'd like to find more out about games and libraries in a more official capacity, this book is currently in Bewley Library, 3rd floor. Well, there it is. I used this for an assignment that I was doing last semester. Great stuff in there. A lot of the types of stuff that I've been talking about here. A lot more library speech. When some people might not be that familiar with that, but it's still another perspective on all this stuff that I've been talking about, and I recommend taking a look at that if you're interested. Any final questions? Yes?
This is so cool.
Thank you. Thank you, I appreciate it. Worked hard on this presentation. Maybe about 3 weeks when we decided to put on a presentation at the event. So thank you.
This was really well done.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. Any other questions?
I just have a general question for you.
Yes.
When did you start playing video games?
When did I start playing video
Exactly,
games?
yeah.
Well, there are a couple of different times when I might have started. There's the games that my parents let me play, which were mostly educational games on Windows XP, like Pajama Sam, Freddy Fish,
Yes.
Putt Putt, which are still great games. I love them. Fun to this day, wacky. And maybe when I was 3 years old, that's the target audience for those games. I think when I started playing games on consoles was when I was 4 or 5. It might have been 2006. We got a GameCube for Christmas, and my sisters got Game Boy Advances. And we played the GameCube all the time, Mario Kart Double Dash and Animal Crossing. In fact, I played a lot of Balloon Fight as a kid because they had the NES games in the Animal Crossing, and I was exposed to some older games through that. I think I played more Balloon Fight than I did actual Animal Crossing, in fact. And then I would always be bugging my sisters to play their Game Boy Advances. I loved Yoshi's Island, the port of that. We had another, I was just a big Yoshi fan. I would always try to play Yoshi Topsy Turvy, which is a really, that's another forgotten game that it's hard to come around. Huh?
Yeah, you agree.
Yeah, it's a weird game. It's interesting. It uses a tilt sensor. It's a unique cartridge shape.
Today we're looking at the lens of video games through preservation and library science, but it's not even just like the economics of it, there's also the human development aspect, literacy that comes into it. Because I can play video games before I can read at some point. I'm sure that's something that a lot of people nowadays are growing up doing, especially with those lines of games too.
Yes. Age is a very, well, it's a controversial subject in video games, as a matter of fact. I originally also had a slide on ESRB ratings, because I was talking about my hierarchy that I would organize games in a library, and I thought that ESRB ratings should be included in that. And yeah, I think they're very important to pay attention to and respect in light of the controversies that have been held in games in the past, and it's been proven to be effective in designating appropriate experiences based off of age, and it is acknowledging that in the way that a game collection is organized is it should do a lot to protect games as being a positive influence in the library space. And you mentioned development. Yeah, I don't want to.
I just wanted to point out that we can look at video games at a lot of different ways of how people have interacted with them. I loved your in the first part, all the different ways that you talked about how we interact.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
If that's all the questions that we have, then we have one more.
Yeah, do you spend extra money on collector editions or something like that? Or
I don't really, I don't think so. When I collect games, I consider a game to be the same if it has the same code on the disc or cartridge. Like, an easy example is the Ocarina of Time cartridges for 64. Some of them are gold, some of them are gray. There's no difference on what's inside. Maybe besides, if they were different shipments, then they might have fixed a bug or two. But they're the same game. There's no content difference. I don't collect them as a difference. Yes?
A later version of Ocarina of Time removed the, like version 1.0 of Ocarina of Time had like these chanting in the fire temple that was apparently used for religious stuff, and the later version of the game removed that. I don't know if that could be the difference between the gold and the gray cartridges.
I would have to do research on that. It very well could be. I'm unsure though, and if I were collecting, I would consider those two versions of the game to be one and the same. I don't generally like distinguish between greatest hits or standard releases or anything like that.
What about remasters or remakes? Just like
Remakes? Remakes I would consider to be different.
yeah.
Most definitely, yeah. Yeah. And yeah, so that's that. If that's all the questions we have, thank you very much. I appreciate all your enthusiasm, and we can get started with the playing part of the presentation now. Oh, I went over. I'm sorry, everybody, but we still have plenty of time, especially since there's not too many people here. Everybody's gonna get to play a lot. So yeah, we got our three systems here: an Atari, a ColecoVision, and an NES. And we have all these games. I'll set them out, and we'll let's just go with it. Hey.
So we're gonna ask that you please do not touch any of the consoles or games, just the controllers as we play.
I've never seen an Atari in person before.
Today is the first time I've ever experienced an Atari, and we called it being Atari, which is just playing it for the first time.
I don't get it.
I think it's just learning how to play it for the first time. Because I held my controller upside down.
Oh my goodness.
And be warned, the Atari does not run nearly as well on that TV as the NES.
Having an issue. This is an older TV. So this is
thank
gonna
you.
be player
Thank
one.
you.
I learned so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
How do you want to start?
Huh? Oh, yeah.
We're gonna
Should
wait
I
for
stop
him to
rolling?
change.
I'm gonna stop it.
So insert